This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am speaking with Charles Simpson, who is joining us all the way from the North Downs of Kent in England. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing fantastically well. Lovely to be here.
For those unfamiliar with your properties, would you mind giving us a potted history of your life in the world of wine?
Jamie, I'll do my best. So it starts way back in probably around about 2001. For my sins, I actually worked in big pharmaceuticals for many a year out of university. I was actually based in the States at the time, but through various channels, I was brought back to the UK with one of the companies I was working with at the time. Met and fell in love with my wife, now business partner. And shortly after, the company I was working for at the time, Alexa Welcome, sent us out to the former Soviet Union. Specifically, we were living in Baku, Azerbaijan. And on a cold Soviet evening, living in an ex-KGB building, my wife and I would pontificate about, recently married, what we wanted to do with our lives. And we concluded, not this. And we began to sort of navel gaze on the things that we could do together. And I guess the thing that kept on gravitating to the top was wanting to run a business. But we loved the great outdoors. But we had no background in viticulture or winemaking at all. But we were very good, as most people are, at drinking wine, and that was one of the great interests that brought it to the top of our attention. I was very busy at the time opening offices in the Caucasus, the former Soviet Union, and Ruth was doing humanitarian work out there. But she enrolled in a distance learning course out of the University of South Australia in Adelaide, and they used to send out the books out to Azerbaijan. So she would be studying wine, and in our free time we'd be writing a business plan. And one of the key things, and this will come back, you'll sort of feed into our story all the way along, is that we wanted to be part of an up-and-coming part of the world. One, because we couldn't afford to buy into a Champagne, a Bordeaux, and Burgundy, but also aspirationally, we wanted to be part of growing something, and something that was organic, and we were young, we were in our late 20s, and we felt we had a life to dedicate to the cause, and so we wanted to champion an area that had been underserved. So we got to the point where we'd written this full business plan. We'd sent it out to friends and relatives who were in the trade to evaluate it. And we got to the point where we realized there was nothing more we could do than go on our global due diligence tour. So we actually quit our day jobs, moved back to the UK, and actually set off, spending most of our time actually down under. The areas that we were most interested in were in places like Margaret River in Western Australia, because at the time, this is back in 2000, 2001, it was just beginning to be up and coming. We went further south down to places like Mount Barker in Denmark, and also over to Central Otago in New Zealand, which we just missed the wave. I mean, there wasn't much left. Right. Like locusts down there, everything's sort of been mulched and eaten by the time we got there. And I guess as we were following this journey, we kept on reading about the Languedoc-Roussillon, and the conclusion was, if there was anywhere in the old world you could do a new world project, it would be there, because of the relative liberation of the rules, and I do underline relative.
What do you mean, so, if you were working out with the appellation system?
Precisely right.
Yes.
Precisely right.
Yeah.
So we very much wanted, I guess it was our upbringing. We wanted the ability to plant what we want, grow what we want, make wines the way we want, without the confines of the appellation system. And I'd say to some degree, Jamie, we were a bit rebellious. We were young, and we couldn't understand the purpose of the appellation. In fact, if anything, we very much felt that it protected mediocrity. And so even when we concluded that the Languedoc was the place to invest, we were only searching for land that was, at the time, Van de Pay, or now IGP, and not the AOCs. And to some degree, I think, we've been doing this now for 18, 19 years. I think I probably have had a softening. It's rather funny, really. And, as I mature, and I'm, now 50 this year, I almost have a greater respect and understanding for the appellation system, and do believe that in some cases it can protect quality. But at that time, we thought it was the last thing we want to do, that the state would dictate, what you could plant and the way in which you made wines. And certainly we were the product of that generation, probably similar to yourself, that, were, unlike my parents' generation, were confused by the French appellations. And therefore you fell in love with the grape variety. And the great thing about falling in love with a grape variety would allow you to see what terroir meant, because you could buy Chardonnay from California and you could buy Chardonnay from France or Australia, whatever, and it's the same grape variety, and that allowed you to see the depth of what terroir could do. So we were very much fell in love with wine from a varietal perspective and not but from an appellation perspective. So very much when we wrote our business plan, it was about demystifying, removing all the barriers between the consumer and the producer, which is potentially what appellations, don't do. And as you know, I mean, the young generation find it very confusing when they go to their first fine dining restaurant and get handed a wine list, and a sommelier in a bow tie comes over and asks them, what they want. And, it's very intimidating. And unless you have a degree in French geography, it's quite challenging
Yes.
to get those out. Now, I've come to appreciate and respect the I guess the idiosyncratic nature of that. And once you understand it, then, it's actually, it gives you a little bit of power. But, at a time being youthful, we just couldn't see the purpose in it. So our goal really was to ensure that either we would buy a land that was only IGP or vendor pay, or we would declassify. And that's what we found in Domaine Sainte-Rose. We found this beautiful 16th century chateau with 46 hectares of vines, with a winery on site. It was way more expensive than we could afford. Like any property in my life, certainly, you fall in love with something that you can't have. But through various creative accounting and financing, we were able to buy it. And this is going back to 2002. And we moved in to Sainte-Rose in May of that year, and had our first child 3 weeks after we moved in. So new country, new business, new language, and parents for the first time within 3 weeks after moving into the estate.
And you sold off, to finance that, you sold off your 3-bedroom Kensington apartment, I believe, or Kensington.
Yeah. So we did three things really. We financed a third, so bank financed a third. We sold our apartment in Kensington, which financed a third, and then we did what best way I could describe would be vendor financing. So we convinced the owner, the previous owner, to delay the final third payment for 4 years.
Right.
And we thought it was quite clever because that, in essence, tied him in to our success. He had to be helpful to us.
Of course. Yeah.
So we sort of did it in thirds. And yes, so the good news is, I mean, there were so many things as I look back on it that could have gone wrong. And we were very, very lucky to meet a consultant and advisor who was very known in the Languedoc at the time, a chap called James Herrick. James actually had the largest Chardonnay brand in the UK at the time. He was based out in Languedoc. James is still a very good, close personal friend of ours. And he just sold his brand to Southcorp for millions. And he was at a loose end and said, listen, I like the people, I like the project, I'm about the place. If I can help you out in any way, I would. And so he was our guardian angel and really helped us get established there. Yeah.
And you went on to open a property back in England.
We did. So I guess 10 years into Sainte-Rose, so fast forward, we bought in 2002, 10 years, fast forward to 2012. Sainte-Rose was, we'd grubbed up a lot of the old spurious Languedoc varieties. We'd planted only the noble varieties, as we were just describing. We have a total of 14 different grape varieties we grow down there, produce about 400,000 bottles a year, and everything's selling. We're selling everything in bottle. And the question was, what do we do next? And right. Many of our friends and family were saying, oh, you should put your feet up. I mean, getting one wine business off the ground and profitable is a miracle in itself, let alone, considering doing anything else. But Ruth and I very much felt we had another project in us. We were now in our sort of early 40s. We didn't want any more exposure to France for various reasons. And I guess in our time in the wine industry, we kept on hearing about what was happening back in the UK. And we, like a lot of our compatriots in France, we thought it was just a bit of a passing trend and phase, and it would die out. But we kept on hearing again more and more about it. When we were over in the UK, we would pick up bottles and taste them. And we felt very much that the industry had got to the stage where it was out of the bleeding edge and into the cutting edge, if you know what I mean. So there was now like the support network that was building up around the vineyards in terms of planting crews, in terms of pickers, pruners, all of that. So the industry was now beginning to gear up and actually become a proper industry. So we thought, well, let's just put our toe in the water. And so we decided just to buy some land. So we bought 35 hectares, or 87 acres for argument's sake, in the North Downs. Now, Ruth and I have no links at all to England.
I was wondering,
and Ruth's a Scot. And so the only reason for being in the North Downs is because of terroir. Right. And as many of your viewers may know, the incredible thing about the North Downs and the South Downs, it is the same identical geology to parts of Burgundy and Champagne. So it's the chalk basin, the Parisian basin, that goes onto the English Channel and gets forced to the surface in the North and South Downs. So we knew that we wanted to be in either the North or South Downs. We didn't have an opinion one way or the other because we had no family links to that part of the world. But we put some feelers out to some estate agents in terms of, we knew exactly what we wanted in terms of the size of the property. We knew we needed to be on chalk. We'd bought some satellite data and looked and modeled, I guess, the growing season, and figured out that you needed to be below 100 meters. You needed to be on south-facing slopes for heat accumulation. You needed decent slopes for cold air drainage, because frost is a big issue in the UK. We already knew that you needed big commercial-sized blocks and not little tiny fields. And then wind is another big issue, particularly during flowering. So to have decent tree lines and protection around us. So when you actually began to look at the map of the strips of North and South Downs, anything that's northeast or west, forget about. Anything above 100 meters, forget about it. If it's a plateau, forget about it. And actually, there's not that much suitable land, despite what people think. So we were very fortunate. We found a farmer who was looking to sell land. In fact, believe it or not, of all the places we heard about it was Decanter magazine. It was the first time Decanter had actually woken up to what was happening in England and actually published this land for sale. So Ruth and I flew over from France, stood at the gate of one of these blocks of land, fell in love with this incredible little valley that we were in. It's a little microclimate called the Elam Valley, just south of Canterbury. And one of the things that finally tipped it for us, we knew that we had the right place in terms of the terroir and proximity. And I'll come back to how east we are and how relevant that is. But one of the things that really clinched it for us, as we drove back to Canterbury, we're just south of Canterbury, about 6 miles, and we drove into Canterbury. And as you come to the main roundabout, you can see Canterbury Cathedral in the distance, very dramatic shot. And there was a big brown sign that said, "Welcome to Canterbury." And underneath it, it said, "Twinned with Reims in Champagne." And I thought to myself, how ironic. That's a pretty good connection.
Yes, yeah.
And actually, what is even more fascinating about that is our now friends and neighbors here in Kentish, Champagne Taittinger. We're one of 2 champagne houses that have invested in the UK. And we know Pierre-Emmanuel Taittinger very well. And it was actually his father that was mayor of Reims at the time. Wow. Okay. He did the twinning with Canterbury. Right. And that was one of the reasons Pierre-Emmanuel fell in love with wanting to have land in Canterbury. So final thing just on where we are is we are probably the most easterly vineyard of any scale. Now, East is very relevant because similar to the part of the world you live on, there are certainly climatic trends. And one of the things that's true of the UK, particularly the south of the UK, is maturity, and this is true for arable, it's true for fruit, runs from east to west. So the east part of the country is warmer, we get more sunshine hours, and the farmers here are picking wheat before they are in Sussex, Surrey, Hampshire, Cornwall, etc., as you go across the country. Now, the significance of that to viticulture is we can all conclude that England is only just suitable for growing grapes and making wine. We're just at the margins.
Yes,
right?
rather marginal. Yeah.
Indeed. So anything you can
Mm-hmm.
do to work in your favour, and being east is one of them. So we either are going to get maturity quicker and get our sugars higher, flavour development, or in a really challenging year, we'll be able to get the fruit out of the vineyards quicker. So it's a real competitive advantage of how east we are.
And you decided to plant exclusively champagne varietals, so Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier.
Yeah.
And
so,
sorry.
I was going to say, so the strategy originally, and I think it's quite an interesting journey, because originally Ruth and I, having, I guess, pushed water uphill in the Languedoc for 12 years, 10 years at the time, we said, listen, the trend for England is method traditional sparkling wines like they make in Champagne. And therefore, rather than jump in the stream and try and swim upstream, which is what we did in the Languedoc, jump in and go with the flow. So the project was only going to be method traditional sparkling wines, hence the Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier. However, we were curious with the satellite data we'd bought and the weather data we had and how far east we were. And again, we're surrounded by sea on all three sides. So Whitstable's about 6 miles to the north. You've got Sandwich, similar distance to the east, and then Folkestone and Dover to our south. So we're really quite warm. And our gamble was that in certain years, we could actually get some of our fruit phenolically ripe to be able to make still wines.
Yes.
Now, I promise you, when we arrived in the country, we vowed that we would never make an English still wine because we did not think it could stand up to our French wines. And again, the goal was sparkling, sparkling, sparkling. But in our first year of plantation, as an experiment, we planted a Chardonnay clone called 548, which is a Chablis Burgundian still wine clone. And obviously, the first harvest we had was 2016, and we picked everything early enough to make sparkling base wines. But we kept all of the clones and rootstock separately. And we were just so enamored by this clone 548. It was so Chablis-esque. I mean, it just had this incredible purity and tension that you would only see in white Burgundy. Problem is, we'd picked it way too early to make decent still wine out of it. But we made 600 bottles of it. And true story, we took it as a guest wine to the Colorado Wine Festival, which I think was 2 years ago. They were doing a specialty on Southern French wines, and Ruth and I were there as the guests of honor to speak. And in a blind tasting, we put our English Chardonnay in, and it was actually a charity auction. And so people would bid blind on one bottle of wine they tasted, and then bid to buy the second bottle. And it was a charity auction, I'll give it that. But someone bid $750 for our English Chardonnay.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, and so after that, they'd asked us to stand up and present what the wine was.
Yes.
And so we said, well, where do you think it's from? And of course, it's got to be, Premier Cru Chablis,
yes,
something, and something like that. And of course, I said it's actually from England, and they're like, "Can we have our money back?" So we got this incredible feedback on this first trial with Chardonnay, clone 548. That in subsequent plantings, we began to plant more of the still wine clones. So we planted a lot of 548. On the Pinot front, we planted clone 115, which is sort of Maury Saint-Denis
Yes.
area of Burgundy, and also some 777. And fast forward to where we are today, having vowed we wouldn't make still wine, we're now making about 1/3 of our production is still wine.
Oh, wow.
And certainly the still Chardonnays, we do 2 still Chardonnays, and we do a still Pinot Noir. I swear, and someday I'd like to do this with you, if you saw them blind, you would swear they were Burgundy, probably from a light year, meaning a slightly cooler year, but they are so varietally honest. And if you think about it, they're the same clones, you're on the same geology, why wouldn't they look the same?
Now, one thing on a slightly nerdy note, you mentioned rootstocks. Are there not only a couple of rootstocks, and very particular rootstocks, that work with that, the chalk soil that you have there?
That's right. So the workhorse in the viticultural world is what the French call SO4 or SO4, and that's what we would entirely use down in the Languedoc-Roussillon.
Right.
And coming back to the UK context, because of the high level of chalks, you get a disease called chlorosis, which is the locking up of iron in the magnesium. And so there are only 2 rootstocks you can use, and that's Furcal, which is French for fair, meaning iron, and cal, meaning calcium.
Is it
Furcal and 41B, very similar name, 41B. So what we have done at Simpsons is we have tried to introduce as much clonal diversity as we can, but also on the 2 different rootstocks. So we've got all of the clones on 41B and Furcal. And so in total, for something like Chardonnay, we've got 12 clones, but on the 2 rootstocks, so 24 different permutations.
Giving you a large palette to pull from. Yeah.
Precisely, because even though, the clone probably gives more variance in the resulting wine, rootstock can as well, because something like Furcal is far more vigorous and provides more nutrients to the clone than 41B. So you'd get slightly higher yields on Furcal and more concentration on 41B. So even the rootstock can actually impact, the resulting, fruit and also wines.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I really do appreciate you joining us at Good Food Revolution today. I really appreciate your time, and thank you for filling us in on 2 sides of the wine world there, both in Kent and down in Languedoc. And it's a pleasure to meet you.
It's an absolute pleasure to speak with you, Jamie.
Excellent. Let's catch up again soon over some of your Pinot Noir and your Chardonnay.
Look forward to it.
Bye for now. Bye-bye.
Stay safe.